Hey everybody, this is the franchise Shane Douglas. Remember me? When you want the lowdown on all the great wrestling information, come meet here with Steve and the Scum right on WGD Weekly. It's extreme.
All right, folks, we are back. Welcome to Wrestling's Glory Days Weekly with Steve and the Scum. My name is Steve. With me is the Scum, and it's a very, very exciting week around here, Scum. We're finally able to reveal the third man, the person that's going to join our show and take us to new levels, whether it be high or really, really low. We don't know. I'm very, very excited. What's going on this week, my man?
Oh, not much going on here, Steve. Just excited, as you said, bubbling with excitement. Always great to be back here with you, my longtime tag team partner. Really looking forward. We're going to jump right into the interview here this week with the Russian Nightmare, Nikita Koloff. And stay tuned, listeners, because immediately following the interview with Nikita, as Steve just alluded to, the reason we're so excited, the new host, we can finally let the cat out of the bag, so to speak, and we thought it would be appropriate for him to make the announcement personally. So right as we come out of the Nikita Koloff interview on this program, you are going to hear from the new host, the new leader, so to speak, of Steve and the Scum, and it is a bombshell, so you're going to want to stay tuned and listen, folks.
Yeah, I'm really excited for that. Lots of stuff in store this week. Of course, the big announcement, Nikita Koloff, the Russian Nightmare, doesn't disappoint either. A really, really good interview there. We're going to follow up the announcement. We're going to talk a little bit about Nikita's finishing move and who has the best clothesline. So as you're listening to Nikita Koloff, leave your opinion on our Twitter page at WGD Weekly. So many more things in store. So little time to do with Scum. I'm pretty much at the point where I just want to hit the play button, listen to Nikita Koloff interview, and then get to the big announcement.
Absolutely, Steve. Me too. We're real excited. We think you're going to be real excited out there. We got Nikita Koloff coming right at you. Again, don't click off at the end of the interview. You're definitely going to want to hear who this major name, major superstar, the third man that we've been alluding to bring Steve and the Scum to the promised land, to move on to bigger and better things. And also don't forget, next week, we have our special celebratory season finale / 1 year anniversary program with a tandem, two, both at the same time. Our old friend James E. Cornette and the Taskmaster, Kevin Sullivan, will both be here with us for the interview next week, season finale. But without further ado, let's get right into it, Steve. I think the phone lines are lighting up from over in Siberia. So let's get to the Russian Nightmare.
You got it, man. Nikita Koloff right after this.
Hey, yo, say hello to the bad guy, Scott Hall. And you're listening to WGD Weekly. Brother.
All right, Scum Nation, we are back with the Russian Nightmare, Nikita Koloff. He is with us now. Nikita, how's it going tonight?
You know what? If I got any better, guys, I wouldn't know what to do with myself. That's pretty good, isn't it?
Well, that's really good to hear, Nikita. Thanks again for joining us. Now, as we always do on our show, we like to provide our listeners with a timeline of your career from start to finish. And now the beginning of your career is very interesting. Of course, the story goes being recruited by Joe Laurinaitis, none other than Road Warrior Animal, to get into the world of professional wrestling. But prior to that, you were a football standout, not only at the high school, but at the collegiate level. So tell us a little bit about how you got interested into the world of professional wrestling, and talk to us a little bit about your football career as well.
Well, it's been an interesting journey, guys, for sure. I was very passionate about working out, lifting weights, and in football from a very young age, actually the age of 12, when I picked up a magazine. It was called Iron Man magazine. I just kind of became infatuated with the guys in those magazines, and I thought, man, one day, I want to look like those guys. That was at the age of 12, and I was entrepreneurial from a young age. I had a paper route at that time. I went down to Sears and Roebuck and bought a 110-pound plastic weight set, and that launched me into many years of that continues today, many years of weight training and taking care of this body, and then of course I saw the NFL on television, and like many young men, young boys, had a vision for one day playing in the NFL, and began to embrace the football. The football and the football business and the world of football, and so I had a fun through college, high school and college, and I did sustain some what could have been some very serious injuries in college. But if anyone that knows me, they know what they know about me is that anything I do, I'm all in. I'm not one of those who is lukewarm, and I'm either hot or cold, but mainly hot, and I'm all in to whatever it is that I'm doing. And so with that said, in college I was determined to come back from the injuries I sustained, which I did, was scouted by the NFL, and was training for a pro football tryout when Animal gave me a call, and he simply asked this question, guys. He just said, hey, there's a promoter in the Carolinas that is looking for a big guy who wouldn't mind shaving his head and becoming a Russian, and I told him about you. Are you interested? And at first, I was kind of like, really? I don't know, because, again, my passion was football. I was excited for him and Hawk, but not so sure that I wanted to entertain the idea of being a pro wrestler. But the more I thought it through, I thought, well, why not? I'll give it a shot and see what happens. And that was the opening question that he asked.
Very good, very good. So before I went any further, because I kind of blended into the next question that I was going to ask here, just wondering, obviously you're from that Minnesota area. Where did your friendship, or how did you know Animal and Hawk prior to getting into wrestling?
Well, Animal, I actually, I guess you might say turnabout is fair play. I actually recruited Animal to our college back in the college football days, and we just became the best of friends. I became like a prodigal son to the family. He had 3 boys. Of course, anyone who knows the history of wrestling knows Animal and his brother John Laurinaitis in the front office of the WWE, and his brother Mark, the youngest, was Mark Laurinaitis, who wrestled for a number of years as well. And so we just had an incredible friendship over the years, and so when they approached him and asked him who he knew might fit the persona of what they were looking for, this nephew for Ivan Koloff, he immediately saw, or I should say thought of me, and that's what prompted him to make the phone call. Gotcha.
We actually had Animal on a while back on the show we did. It was the week of the 10th year anniversary of the passing of Hawk, and we had Animal come on, and we kind of did a tribute show with him. He's a great guy. I mean, fantastic. So actually told us some great stories from back in those days in Minnesota. I believe the place was called Grandma B's or something like that. Was that
Grandma B's? Now, see, I actually met Hawk just really through, I didn't really know him prior to the wrestling business. Okay. And a number of those guys were down there, and I was not, I wasn't working with any of those guys. I would meet Hawk really a little bit later, so came to get to know Hawk. So hard to believe it's been 10 years already.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, no kidding. It doesn't seem it, but anyway, just moving along, what I was going to get on, you sort of touched on when you came in to the NWA, working for Jim Crockett Promotions, shaved the head, you were, Ivan's nephew, the Russian Nightmare. You kind of said, that was what was pitched to you. What were your initial thoughts when, given the, politically what was going on in the world then, what were your initial thoughts when you were told, all right, you're going to be the Russian Nightmare?
Well, I thought great storyline. I mean, the timing of it. I mean, for the historian out there who understands, the Russians were boycotting the LA Games. America boycotted the games in Moscow in 1980. It's 1984. The Russians are boycotting the games in LA. And what a great storyline. This nephew is supposed to compete with, in the Olympics, but can't because of the boycott, doesn't want to wait 4 more years, so he's going to go ahead and turn pro, and he's going to be Ivan's protege. And, of course, Ivan had a storied career of his own in wrestling, obviously the greatest match being the defeat of Bruno Sammartino after many, many years of being a champion. And so he had a storied career. And the interesting thing, for those who maybe aren't aware of this, and for those who want to read even more of the story than we'll have time to talk about today, they can go to NikitaKoloff.com and read about even more of the story. But the interesting thing is, when I called Jim Crockett, Animal said, hey, call this promoter in Charlotte. When I called him, I told him up front, explained to him that I had no amateur wrestling background, that I had zero professional training, none, nothing, had not even hit a ring rope. Again, my passion was football and weightlifting, and that's where my sights were set. But it's interesting. I had probably a 5-minute conversation with Mr. Crockett on the phone, sight unseen. He had not seen me up to that point, and he simply said on the phone call, be in my office on this day with your head shaved. And that was it. I hung up the phone. I called Animal back, and Animal said, well, swing through Atlanta, and I'll pick you up some boots and tights, and on your way to Charlotte, and of course the old cliche, the rest was history. But that's how I launched into professional wrestling.
Wow, that's very interesting. So now you're there, you're working for the Crockett's, little to no actual in-ring experience, and you're thrust almost immediately into the main event. Take us through what was going through your mind at that point in time, not only at the overall atmosphere of the world of professional wrestling, certainly something new to you, but also working with the guys in the ring. Now, you worked with Ivan Koloff and Crusher Khrushchev, and any three of you actually could defend your tag team championships that you held in very interesting style, similar to the Fabulous Freebirds. So what was going through your mind at the time, being so new to the business and having such little in-ring experience?
Well, it was a crash course, and like I say, you said very little. I know I'm talking zero experience. I mean, the day I walked into Crockett's office, he took a look at me. Of course, at that time I was 285 pounds, 8% body fat, 34-inch waist, and I guess he thought he had a phenomena of sorts. And he walked back in down the hallway with two guys, and again, wrestling wasn't on my radar, so it wasn't like I was this big fan of wrestling. And so he introduced me to Ivan and Don Kernodle, who were the World Tag Team Champions at that point in time, and literally put me on the interview set that day. We did interviews for several hours. I didn't talk. Part of the storyline was you're right off the boat, so you don't speak any English, and so that made that relatively easy. When we finished that, he said, be in Raleigh tomorrow night. You're going to wrestle on television. Keep in mind, I've never been to the ring. We got there, showed me a couple basic things in the dressing room, went to the ring with Ivan and Don, and not liked from day one, guilty by association, right, with the American turncoat Don Kernodle and Ivan Koloff, the Russian Bear. And I had my first win in professional wrestling on television in front of a sold-out crowd in 11 seconds, and that was the launch of my career. Catapulted quickly, like you said, into the I guess you'd say stardom. Within just a couple months, became World Tag Team Champions, World Six-Man Champions, and we would eventually bring Barry Darsow in from Louisiana, from the mid-south area, who would later become our third partner when we turned on Don Kernodle and turned him from heel to babyface, and then brought Barry in, brought Crusher in as our third partner, and that was fun. It was fun to have him in. Him and I went to high school together. A very little known fact, there were actually 7 of us from one high school that ended up professional wrestling. That's a pretty crazy story in and of itself.
Wow, and all 7 of you were in school, like at the same time together?
We were either sophomore, junior, senior. 5 of the 7, 1 year, were all on the same football team. And for those who maybe don't know that story, I'll give you a quick rundown. Mr. Perfect Kurt Hennig, Ravishing Rick Rude, myself, Nord the Barbarian, and Darsow were the 5 who were on the same football team 1 year, either sophomore, junior, senior, and that the other 2 were Tom Zink, the Z-Man, and the lesser known was Brady, who wrestled as Brady Boone, Dean Peters.
Okay.
And those were the 7 of us from Robbinsdale High School. How crazy is that?
That is great. I'll tell you what, I don't see many people sneaking through and getting at the quarterback with you, Henning, Rude, Nord, and Darstow up front on the line, if you don't mind me saying so. Those are some pretty large men there.
It was. The unfortunate thing is, you can have great talent, skills, and ability, but for a team sport, you still need coaching as well. And unfortunately,
Sure.
in high school, we didn't have the best coaching, and so we didn't have the greatest win-loss records, but we certainly had some, as you can tell, some pretty decent athletes.
Sure. Now, I'll have to ask this real quick before we jump on, because I know he was always one of Steve's favorite performers here. John Nord, was he as crazy as he seemed to be as in his character, or was he like that in high school, like everyday functioning, or no?
Actually, I think he was crazier in high school. He toned down for the wrestling business. But.
Nice. Good.
John was, oh my gosh, he was class clown. He was all forever cracking jokes and cutting up and pulling ribs, and so wrestling just helped him. It helped to personify his character into a greater limelight.
Yeah. All right. Well, to move along here, getting back to the your teaming, whether with Ivan and Carnoodle or eventually with Barry as Crusher Khrushchev. I think back to that run and time in your career and getting the great tag title runs that you had with Ivan. 2 teams that really stick out, 2 completely opposites when it comes to like their styles, but the first would be the Rock and Roll Express, and then the second would be the great matches you guys had with the Road Warriors. Looking back, again, I know that you were pretty new to the business end, but could you, for us, for the listeners, kind of compare and contrast, your memories of working and the, how you'd work those different styles against those 2 teams, and what, in your opinion, made, that time and those matches, the tag team division, I guess, as a whole, so special and successful then?
I had a feeling that those would be the 2 teams that you would kind of single out.
Sure.
And it's interesting because certainly the dynamic. You're exactly right. There's quite a dynamic between the difference between the 2 teams. Ricky and Robert being just little guys who are quick in terms of maneuvers and abilities in the ring to entertain the crowd and electrify the crowd really with their style of wrestling, and that's exactly what they did. They electrified the crowd. They were what you might say the consummate underdog, right? How can little Ricky and Robert even pretend to think they're going to defeat the Russian Bear and the Russian Nightmare? But it just made for that much greater a storyline, and just promoted the business that much more by showing that the underdog truly can walk away with the victory with their hands held. And we realized that. We realized when I broke into the business, you have to understand my mindset, and I think I can speak for Ivan when I say this, that we always approached the wrestling profession as a business. And Ivan for sure was the consummate businessman. In other words, he didn't put his personality or his ego in front of making money, in front of the business, and which is commendable to him. And that was my approach as well. There were certain things that I didn't necessarily wasn't real thrilled about, but at the same time I thought, what, this is a business. We're here to entertain the crowd and to make money. And so if that means putting Ricky and Robert over as World Tag Team Champions, and it means, bigger business for everyone involved, then certainly let's do it because it makes sense. And so that's what we did with Ricky and Robert, with the Road Warriors, Animal and Hawk. That brought about a totally, of course, as you said, different style of wrestling, mono man on man, muscle against muscle, and so it created a much more who's going to outmuscle the other kind of scenario with the fans, and who's going to have the greater upper hand when it's all said and done. And so it pitted, as it pitted us against one another, it created just that kind of a dynamic with the two of them, more of a, an equal. We don't know who's going to win because both teams seem to be pretty equal here, so it's going to be interesting to see who does win versus the Rock and Roll, thinking they don't have a prayer or a chance of winning, and yet the underdog got the upper hand. I'd say that would be the difference in the dynamics between the two teams there.
Sure. And at that time, I think you were probably, if I remember correctly, you were probably about the first person that could match up size-wise when the Road Warriors came in and just were steamrolling everyone. So it was interesting in that, that matter as well. Someone that was actually as big, as muscular, how would they fare in there with them?
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. So it made for a good matchup. And obviously Ivan was, up there a little bit of it. If you had to look at that match, okay, well, Ivan's as you might say, no disrespect, the weakest link, and only because, of his age, but nevertheless, he was nicknamed La Machine for a reason. So even though he's up there a little bit in age, boy, he could outlast the three of us in the ring, hands down. So, sure.
From some of the stories he's told, he's not afraid to break a jaw either.
Oh my gosh, when I say he was La Machine, he was a machine. There was no stopping either. He could go. He was. I think they patterned the Energizer Bunny after Ivan Koloff. Actually, I think that's where they got the idea of the Energizer Bunny.
That's great. Well, we wanted to move on and talk about a guy that you were put into the main event spotlight with in 1985 at the Great American Bash, the Nature Boy Ric Flair. It had to have been quite a scenario for you to be put into that spotlight so quickly into your career, less than 2 years in. You get put into the main event with him. It had to have been an interesting scene backstage. Was there any animosity or jealousy between any of the guys that were working there for much longer periods of time? And also, if you could touch on working with the Nature Boy, along with yourself, living your characters both in and out of the ring. Talk to us a little bit about how it was working with the Nature Boy.
Well, great question. And yeah, actually, again, a lot of unique things in relation to my career. It was actually 13 months, almost to the day, if not to the day, 13 months that I stepped in the ring for the very first ever Great American Bash against Ric Flair. If you think about it, Don Kernodle and I talk about this frequently time to time as we think back on just catapulting me into the ring that night in Raleigh with no experience in a sold-out crowd on television. He's like, man, I think back on it, he goes, that's just really kind of insanity, but you pulled it off. And so I feel very fortunate that I was able to, and I guess attributed to, I suppose you might say, the skills and I say the God-given skills and abilities that I have as to why I was able to pull it off. And then 13 months later, to step in the ring in front of 35,000 that were there in Memorial Stadium that night in Charlotte, and be able to wrestle for the World Heavyweight title with really honestly the lack of experience, even though I was working with Don and Ivan, some great guys already in the business. I was still only 13 months into the business, and so to be able to do that is a real tribute to Rick. And what I mean by that is, in fact, I said this just recently. Rick could make a broomstick look good because he made me look good. So I know his abilities were pretty amazing, regardless of a person's talents and skills. And so I look back on that particular night, really kind of marvel at it, to be honest with you, that I had that opportunity, incredibly blessed to have had that opportunity that young into a career, and then to continue on where the career went. In terms of your question about jealousy, there's no doubt that there was maybe not realizing it in the moment of the time, because you're kind of caught up in it. But learning as time went on that there was certainly jealousies within that profession. Guys who had been in the business for many, many, many more years than me who had yet to even get a break like that. But Ivan was very gracious and supportive when that came to the surface, to say to me, look, maybe you didn't spend years in the ring or training and cutting your teeth, in the small towns, and but you obviously paid your dues in other ways. So don't let it bother you. Don't let it affect you. You just keep honing your skills, as you guys said, and continue to press forward and do what you're doing. So very fond memories of all of that.
Sure, and again, who better to have than, one of the all-time greats there is, I know your uncle, I guess, as you would be on screen, but, one of the all-time legends of the business. We've had Ivan on the show. We actually, not too long ago, end of March, we actually got to spend some time with Ivan down here in Clayton, North Carolina, and they do every year. A friend of ours promotes shows down here and did the Ivan Koloff Tag Team Tournament they do each year down here at the fitness center in Clayton, and we had the chance to spend some time with him, and just a great guy. I mean,
I've been to that fitness center before.
Yeah, I knew that. I knew that you have. Lewis here that runs the shows here has told me that you were here before. I had back and forth with him a few times, and had said that we were hoping to get you on the show. So I haven't talked to him in a couple weeks here, but I know that you've worked here with him before, definitely. All right. Well, at this point, about the halfway point of our interview here, Nikita, I usually try to get a kind of a lighter take from our guests. I call this part of the show the 3 R's, and what the R's stand for, we like to get our maybe a funny story out of each guest. The 3 R's stand for either a rib, a riot, or a road story that you recall, in good humor from your time in the wrestling business. So your pick of any of the 3 R's, if you had a story that you could share with us, that'd be fantastic.
Well, I don't know that I could really do it justice. I think the other guys, their version of it is they're much funnier than mine, perhaps. But if the listening audience can visualize, you have to get a real visual of this. There was a time that Sting and I, Animal and Lex Luger, were collectively traveling together quite often, and we were in the Midwest and traveling. I don't even remember at this point. We wrestled every night in so many different towns, but we sometimes didn't. We would book rooms, hotel rooms. Sometimes we wouldn't, just kind of go on the fly, and no pun intended there when I tell you this story. But we ended up at really kind of a what you might say a flea bag motel out in the middle of nowhere in the Midwest, only because it was the only thing available that we could find en route from one town to the other. And I'll never forget, Steve was rooming with Joe, and I was rooming with Lex, and we were essentially, I was kept up all night only because Lex, the consummate cleanliness guy that he was back then, and we were infested with flies, and he had his fly swatter and bug spray going all night long, so didn't get a whole lot of sleep. At least he didn't. And breakfast the next morning, he was describing as only he could do the nightmare that he experienced, not the Russian nightmare, but the nightmare of not getting any sleep. And it was hot, and I mean, it was, you just had to be there to really appreciate the humor behind this. If you really knew how particular he was in terms of his cleanliness, and it was just one of those things where at breakfast the next day, the three of us, Steve and Joe and I, we just couldn't stop laughing. Of course, the more we laughed, the madder he got. And then it came time to order breakfast in this little restaurant next to this flea bag motel, and course, he was even more particular about his food and how it was made, and when they brought out his eggs laden in cooking oil and cooking grease and I mean just one thing after another that we just laughed more and more and more, and the more we laughed, the madder he got, and probably one of those moments you just kind of had to be there, but even thinking back on, we've talked about it since then, but when some of the other guys described that night, especially if Lex describes it, it was one of those moments to capture for history for us, for sure.
Absolutely. Great story. Again, what a carload that is to look back at. I mean, yourself and Sting and Animal, Lex Luger. We appreciate you sharing that with us. That is a great story. And again, visualizing it, I certainly can. So appreciate you sharing that.
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, moving along. Again, I always enjoy hearing some of those road stories and things like that from the legends that we get on, like yourself. Getting back to your great career, next I wanted to touch on what personally, as a fan then, I've always kind of looked at as my favorite series of matches that you were in, and that's with Magnum TA.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure I'm not alone in fondly remembering the Best of 7 series, and of course, speaking of Magnum, no one can ever forget the horrific accident that not only kind of cut what would have been your program short, but ended such a promising career so prematurely. Take us back to your memories working with Magnum in those classic bouts, your reaction when hearing of the terrible crash, and lastly, in your opinion, as someone who worked so closely with him for a while there, how high do you think that his star actually would have risen had he not been a victim of such unfortunate circumstances?
Well, more great questions. We had what I believe some of the most incredible chemistry with one another in terms of our ability to work one against the other, and the fan appeal of the all-American, hot apple pie, hot dog, apple pie kind of guy, and someone that the people could really embrace, against the dirty Russian back in that Cold War era. And probably without fail, the most mentioned or talked about matches when somebody interviews or converses with me about my wrestling career is the Best of 7. They thought it was absolutely one of the most classical things of its time, and really, in depending on who you're talking to, even in all of history, a Best of 7 series for a championship belt. They think it's a phenomenal concept, and so we had incredible chemistry in the ring. Just recently, somebody had pulled up match number 7 a week ago. Actually, today I was at a celebrity golf tournament with some superstars from other sports, and we were playing, and they pulled it up at the dinner table and showing some of that old footage from match number 7. And but all that said, certainly. Nothing but the utmost respect for Terry in the ring, and his unfortunate car wreck. Actually, you asked the question, how did I respond? I mean, I was in Japan. I was on a tour in Japan. Came back. I was in Philadelphia the night they informed me of his car wreck. And speaking of ribs, the wrestling business kind of makes you just a tad skeptical because of all the ribs and jokes that people pull on one another. At first, I thought they were joking. I'm like, yeah, whatever, It took them a while to actually convince me that he really did have a car wreck and that he was really seriously injured. I did not know till that night in Philadelphia, as I said, because I'd been in Japan for a couple weeks. And so I was really taken aback by it. Once it sunk in, and then it was after the wreck that I really began to develop a real friendship with Terry. Prior to that, we had a great working relationship, but I wouldn't say a real bond or friendship outside of the ring until that had happened. And of course, that friendship has lasted till this day. We talk, not frequently, but we do occasionally talk with one another and even from time to time see one another. So I have nothing but just phenomenal, incredible memories of the best of 7 and the matches that he and I had with one another.
It's really good to hear that you guys have been able to maintain a friendship after all of these years. Now, many people have said that Magnum TA could have potentially been one of the best baby faces of all time. And it was right after his accident that you actually had the opportunity to be the baby face for a short period of time as well, teaming up with Dusty Rhodes in his battle against the Four Horsemen. And alongside Dusty, the Road Warriors you worked with against the Four Horsemen in some legendary matches, including the WarGames matches that still stand the test of time to this day as some of the best cage matches ever to watch. So take us through your run working with Dusty Rhodes in his battle against the Four Horsemen.
Okay, great question. And you had mentioned, or you'd asked earlier too, about Magnum's rise to stardom, and let me address that and parlay that into answering these questions. And he was being groomed, kind of step in the shoes of a Ric Flair and being groomed for the eventual world champion, and would have made a phenomenal world champion as well. And with his accident, opened up a door of opportunity to address these other questions. To become a fan favorite, a good guy, a baby face, if you will, of which I never thought I would ever entertain that idea, being, the Russian guy in the Cold War era and all of that came with it. But once again, timing, right? The timing of, as things began to unravel in the communist countries and eventually, as we know, the fall of the Berlin Wall and all of these perestroika and all the things that were glasnost and these things that were taking place overseas, the timing of all of that to form this potential partnership between the American Dream, the Tower of Power, to fleet to be power, if you will, and the Russian nightmare, Nikita Koloff, right? So if you consider the magnitude of that and the potential business that it would draw, at first I was uncertain of what to think about the idea because, again, I was still not that long into my wrestling career, but Jim Crockett and Dusty Rhodes had a lot longer history in wrestling than I did, and they seemed to be very favorable to the idea. It was a roll of the dice in one sense, never having had a babyface Russian before, but at the same time, if it worked, could draw some really big business. And of course, as wrestling historians know, when we did it, it was one of the best-kept secrets in wrestling of its day, probably of its time, by many accounts. And once we did it, for the next couple of years, we did sell-out record business, record-setting business wherever we went. And so that was pretty amazing how it all unfolded, and I was really kind of pleasantly surprised by the results.
Very good. Just real quick before we moved on, we've had quite a few of the participants that have described the atmosphere and the energy surrounding those initial war games between yourself and Dusty and the Road Warriors and Paul Ellering and the Horsemen. We've spoken with Tully Blanchard, J.J. Dillon, Animal, Lex Luger, and just wanted to get your take. All of them have had a very similar memories of that energy and the excitement surrounding those matches. So just wanted to get your take on those, on the initial, when they first brought out the double cage and the War Games matches.
Oh, yeah. Never done before, right? First time, and people didn't know what to expect, but it's just the anticipation. One of the fun things was the anticipation by the fans. Certainly, you could certainly feel the electricity in the arena, and as we would build towards that match, and then once the match time came, and then just the alternating of guys back and forth, and to this day, we never won a coin toss. I'm still trying to figure out how we picked the wrong guy to call the coin toss every single time. It just never worked out. However, with that said, just the alternating back and forth and the build up and the build up and the build up to when all 10 were finally in the ring, and it was electrifying. I know that word gets so overused so many times, but it really was. You could feel the electricity in the air and the fans and their support of it and their level of excitement in watching it, and it just made for some really incredible memories as I look back on them, for sure. And then all the guys who were a part of those initial ones. With the Horsemen, as you mentioned, and all the combination from the WarGames to the 8-man tags to the 6-man tags to the tag matches to the single matches. I mean, there was such a variety of matches that were made from the Superpowers and the Road Warriors against the Four Horsemen that it's really no surprise why we did sell out business wherever we went. It was a pretty amazing era, just to summarize it.
Yeah. Well, that was, I think, the only one who didn't have that fond of a memory was JJ, and that was because he took a pretty nasty fall there with that clothesline on his shoulder.
Hey, it's all fake, but it's amazing how many guys get hurt from the fake wrestling business.
That's right.
I tell people all the time, because if you had a nickel or a quarter every time you heard that question, I say, hey, look, here's the bottom line. It's no secret anyway. It's 100% entertainment, but it's also 100% real, meaning if I get slammed on a concrete floor, I assure you my body feels the effects of the concrete. The one thing I never learned, I learned a lot in professional wrestling. The one thing that I never learned, guys, was once I got through over the top ropes, I never learned how to put the brakes on 6 inches from the concrete.
Huh. That's a tough one to not.
I never learned that part. I ended up crashing into the concrete. They tried their best to teach me that. I never learned how to do that.
It sounds like a painful lesson.
Obviously, tongue in cheek on that one. But.
Sure. Well, again, not too long after that series, due to some family matters and some unfortunate circumstances, you kind of have a hiatus from wrestling. And then the next time we would see Nikita Koloff would be, at length, would be a stint working up in Minnesota, actually, for Vern Gagne and the AWA. I guess, you being a Minnesota guy, that would have to have been somewhat of a homecoming then. So, back then, what was your reasoning when you came back going to work there in the AWA? And, what are some of your memories of your time working there for Vern?
Well, really, we were doing co-promotions with the AWA, Vern and Jim Crockett, kind of tag teaming, so to speak, to go head to head with Vince, and so there was an amicable relationship there with Vern, and coming in really honestly to try and help him out. His territory his talent pool was dwindling, his territory was struggling. And Crockett, because of the co-promotion, didn't have any problem with me going up to try and help Vern out, trying to help him draw some ratings. The majority of what I did was just television tapings, matches against Larry Zbyszko and some of the other guys, and just trying to generate some ratings for Vern. We did a few house shows, but again, the house shows were really more co-branded between the NWA and the AWA for the most part. So it was you might say a brief stint with and in the AWA, but mainly for those reasons that I was working with Vern.
Wow, interesting. So essentially being put on loan by the Crockett's to the AWA. You go back and work for the Crockett's again, though, in 91 and 92. Both times you work with Sting, both as his opponent and against him in the ring. An amazing character himself. He's still prominent in today's marketplace. So tell us a little bit about your time working with Sting and watching his career grow alongside yours and to the heights that it went. You guys also share a bond, not only inside the ring, but spiritually as well. So tell us a little bit about your thoughts of watching Sting progress throughout his career from then until now.
Yeah, and for those, I mean, I guess if they don't know my story, I stepped away, had a wife die of cancer, and kind of shocked the wrestling world to walk away from, in the, I guess, some would say the peak of a career at that moment to take a sabbatical to take care of her. I just felt it was the right thing to do, and so I did that and told them I'd be back, and so when I eventually made the decision to come back, their first thought was, put me against, really initially they wanted the Luger. So that's where I, presented him with the U.S. heavyweight title kind of over his head, across it, kind of introduction there. And they thought, no, that'll get over, because he's really over. And they wanted to bring me back as a heel. I'm like, you mentioned earlier the thing with Magnum and coming to Dusty's aid. And I tried to help them understand. I'm like, guys, you got to understand something. That angle was so strong. I'm telling you, to bring me back as a heel, I do not believe it's going to get over. They were convinced it would. And so they put me against Lex, and we had a series of matches. And it was a 50-50 split. People cheered me as much as they cheered him. They go, well, let's put him against Sting. And that's where they're in St. Petersburg, I think, Florida, and Lex and Sting were wrestling the Steiners for the tag title. And so I did a deal where it looked like I was going after Luger, and I ended up hitting Sting, and we fight out to the parking lot. And so we tried the angle with Sting. And that got over a little bit better, but still not to the point of me being this full-fledged heel again. And so I took another short hiatus, came back, and made my appeal to Sting. Actually, I had my oldest daughter, Taryn, painted up like a little stinger for that, and made my appeal. And of course, so we ended up tag teaming. And I look back with great memories with Steve, both working against him, working with him, all the guys I worked with. I mean, I just feel like, I was very fortunate, very blessed to have the opportunity I had. And in regards to him, continuing his wrestling career, I just have so much respect for Steve, his desire and his ability, to just get in the ring and continue to perform. And so, my hat's off to him. We have had a transition outside the ring, as you mentioned. Actually, several of us, myself and Steve and others, Ted DiBiase, Tully Blanchard, you mentioned earlier, a number of the guys who, at some point in their journey called life, realized that outside of wrestling there is real life, and that even with the stardom and success and everything that we have achieved and accomplished, what every one of us, I think, if we were all on the phone today, would conclude that all of the success and stardom still left us something missing in our lives. I know for myself, when I chose to walk away from wrestling at the end of 92, beginning of 1993, and began to ponder my future, I'm like, I'm successful, but I'm unfulfilled. I'm just not fulfilled with what I have accomplished and achieved. And of course, for me personally, 17 October 1993 is when I found myself in the wrestling match of a lifetime at an altar in a church, surrendering my heart to Jesus. And for me, that's where life really took off, and the fulfillment of it the last 21 years, tag teaming with Lex at a pulpit, and even Steve and Shawn Michaels and others over the years now, sharing our stories of how life changed when we made that decision beyond our success inside of a squared circle, has left an eternal perspective for us, and the opportunity really to share our story with so many, even the listeners today who will hear this message. Guys, my life's been an amazing journey. It really has.
It sure sounds it. And again, it's we said we had spoken with Ivan a while back, and he actually, when we spoke with him, gave a lot of credit for the path that he's taken to yourself. He said you sort of gave back to him more than he ever could, I believe is how he had given to you when you came into wrestling. It's kind of how he put it, and sort of opening his eyes to that path, and so he was very gracious when he spoke of that, actually.
Yeah, he's one of several that I've had the privilege of in some way, shape, or form, just inviting or introducing or just sharing some of my story, my life-changing story, and then I was fortunate the night that he was at the altar. I was fortunate to witness him surrendering his life and his heart to the Lord. And what a powerful story he has. You talk about a powerful story. I mean, my gosh, as he tells it, just the deliverance from drinking and drugs and everything that the Lord delivered him from in an instant from making that decision is powerful. I'm humbled at the thought that I had a small role in that life-changing event for him. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, that's great. And like I said, he shared that with us as where I was first aware of it. I'm sure Steve as well. So, anyhow, to finish up, I had one last question for you. I was going to send it back over to Steve for a segment he does as we wrap things up here. We really appreciate you taking the time to be with us here on Wrestling's Glory Days Weekly. Someone that we've certainly always wanted to get, both of us big fans of yours. It's been a thrill to have you on the program. With the last question, a lot of times here we try to set the record straight on some things maybe that you've heard, don't really know what truth there is to it. It's a wrestling lore, I guess we call it. So I want to go back into the mid-'80s. You were obviously quite a physical specimen, the Russian Nightmare, and it would seem then you would have been a perfect fit for an opponent then for WWF champion, All-American, Hulk Hogan. Many stars from NWA, from AWA, from all over were kind of snatched up at that time by Vince McMahon and brought in as they grew nation and worldwide. Just to be clear on this, were there ever any talks for you to go out and work for New York and work for Vince? If there were, what happened? Why didn't that ever come to fruition? And if not, was there a specific reason why you didn't explore that option?
Well, another great question, and I get that asked often in these interviews, and certainly, the magazines certainly promoted that. What would happen if Nikita Koloff and Hulk Hogan ever stepped in the ring against one another? And those sorts of things, of course, in many of their other very talented men that they had working with them at the time. I never really had never really came to any actual negotiations of sorts. Met Vince one time in a gym in Las Vegas and had a conversation with him there. But, and it wasn't about wrestling. We just talked, And Barry Darsow, actually, when he was leaving here, the Carolinas, and going to New York, he was hoping I would go with him and create the Demolition. And really, honestly, I couldn't say yes. I felt a real sense of loyalty to Jim Crockett and the NWA, even though, no doubt I probably could have went there and made, who knows? It's all speculation, but 10 times the money or more, who knows? But for me, anyone who gets to know me understands that loyalty is a very big thing with me. And I just felt very loyal to Jim Crockett for giving me the break and the opportunity that he gave me, even though it meant making perhaps a lot less money. I chose to stay with the NWA. And so even though you brought up the AWA earlier, I wouldn't have done that without Crockett's blessing on my doing that with the AWA. because of my loyalty to Jim Crockett and my heart of gratitude for the opportunity he gave me, the way I broke in. I mean, he took a real chance, let's face it, with a guy who had zero experience, and to put me on TV in front of a sold-out crowd, and so that is why I stayed. So I never really got to a point of any, negotiation or lobbying one against the other or leveraging one against the other to try and even get a bigger payday.
Sure. Well, again, just was wondering that. It speaks volumes for your character and the loyalty there. Real quick, you wouldn't have been, you would have still been a pretty young man. It seemed like in that late 90s boom period there when, Raw and Nitro were head to head, what they call the Monday Night Wars, you would have, just been in your mid to late 30s. Ever any allure or any interest in coming back at that point to either of the companies, or seemed like everyone else did?
Actually, wasn't even mid to late 30s. I was 33 years old. 33 years young. In fact, it's funny, if you were to ask Lex about this, Lex has become one of my dearest friends. He tells the story often, like a lot of times when we're doing ministry together, he'll introduce me, and he'll tell the story. He goes, "Man, this guy left wrestling right before all the big $1 million contracts, all the big, the fat checks, and quite honestly, I thought the guy I thought he lost his mind. I thought he was, he'll tell you, he goes, I thought he was an idiot. He walked away from all this. I thought, what's wrong with that guy? What a moron. What an idiot." He goes, but in telling the story, he goes, but, what did I know, and little did I know how his life would change shortly after he left wrestling, and eventually how we would come back together because of our common bond now through Christ, and tag teaming together for ministry now, and so I walked away really about as unusual for this business, this profession, as how I entered it. So it's quite fitting, I guess you'd say, in a sense, that as uniquely as I entered into this profession, I walked away from it. Many or some, I'll say, for the football fan out there, I've been coined the Barry Sanders of pro wrestling. And the biggest reason, guys, the number one reason why I walked away when I did was part of a childhood dream and a goal that said when I made it, and whatever I made it in, I was thinking football, but turned out to be wrestling. I said, I want to walk away on top of the game. I want to walk away with leaving the fans wanting more than wondering when is this guy going to give it up. And so it was a goal of mine that 35 was my target, and I was 33, just getting ready to turn 34 when I made the decision to walk away. So actually beat that goal by a little bit over a year. But in answer to your question about looking back, I have no regrets in walking away when I did, the way I did. My replacement, Bill Goldberg, they signed for a guaranteed $3 million a year contract, right? And I don't know that I made that in my total career, to be just transparent with everybody. And here's the thing, though. With what I've done in way of ministry over the last 21 years, and the lives like Ivan Koloff, like Sting, like Lex, and others who have had the privilege of mentoring now, I can't put a price tag on that. I take Men on the Mountaintop, an event called Quest, and I see men's lives changed on the mountaintop. I can't put a price on that. And so I look back and go, okay, if I'd stayed, and they'd offered me the same contract they offered Bill Goldberg, and $3 million a year, and I'd wrestle another 15 years. Well, do the math, right? That's $45 million without any royalties or anything else. Can't put a price tag on what I've experienced the last 21 years, the 26 countries I've been able to travel now, the audiences I've been able to speak to, and the lives that I literally have seen changed for eternity. I can't put a price tag on. So I have no regrets in looking back and walking away the way I did. Scott Teal, who's published many of the wrestling books, and William Murdoch, a dear friend of mine, longtime friend of mine, who helped me with that one. My third book, actually, the second one, Wrestling with Success, was a phenomenal book, co-authored by Jeffrey Gittimer as well. But and some other things in the works that we don't have time to talk about today, but maybe another time as life continues to unfold for me and the journey continues on. Very appreciative of you guys giving me this opportunity to talk with you guys today and share just a little bit of my story, guys. Steve and Chris, you guys have been very gracious today. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Well, it was our pleasure, Nikita. Thanks again for joining us on our show here. We're down to the last segment, name association. I know your time is valuable, so we're going to keep it real quick. Just a couple of names that we didn't get a chance to talk about on the show. So let's start out with a favorite of ours that we always like to get in on our show, Captain Redneck, Dick Murdoch.
Dick Murdoch, my goodness. If here's a guy, another guy to keep you in stitches. He had to be one of the funniest guys I ever met, and what an amazing worker in the ring. I mean, just, for that era of time that he participated in this profession, just a tremendous worker, and just enjoyed getting to know the guy. He was amazing.
Awesome stuff there. Now, we talked about Road Warrior, Hawk, and Animal, but we didn't have a chance to touch base on Precious Paul Ellering, another guy from Minnesota. So take a second, if you could, and tell us a little bit about your time working with Paul Ellering.
Precious Paul Ellering. What a great great gimmick he had, and just the opportunity to manage the stable of wrestlers he had over the course of his career and the years. And although I didn't get to spend a ton of time with Paul, certainly enjoyed the time I was around him, and just gleaning what wisdom I could from him to help with my career. And just again, another great guy to have gotten to know over the years.
Wow, great to hear. How about an old teammate of yours, Ravishing Rick Rude?
Ravishing Rick Rude. He was one tough guy, my goodness, in and out of the ring. Dad was a Golden Gloves boxing champion, and really desired that Rick take that path, but Rick really didn't have the desire to box, but was definitely could have excelled in that sport as well, because he was just one of the toughest guys I knew of his day, in and out of the ring, on and off the football field.
Oh, fantastic. Now, our last guy, I did a little bit of research, and I couldn't quite see where you two had crossed paths in the ring, potentially in Japan maybe, but we always wanted to get every one of our guests to weigh in on the legendary Andre the Giant.
Unfortunately, we didn't cross paths in the squared circle. I get asked just recently again. I got asked that question. I would have. I think I would have enjoyed a match with him. I'm not so not so sure, but no. Everything I've ever heard about Andre, he was the giant of a gentleman, and some of the stories I've heard about him were phenomenal stories, and so it's unfortunate I never got to work with him in the ring, but cannot say anything outside of the ring. I've heard nothing but good things about Andre. I only met him a handful of times in passing, and so never really got to know him well, but just heard good things about him.
Fantastic. And thanks for being on our show again, Nikita Koloff, everybody. It was fantastic to have you, and we really appreciate your time.
I appreciate all the listeners out there. Thank you for all your loyal fan support over the years. You really, if it wasn't for you, we wouldn't be who we are. It wouldn't have become who we became. And so I just say a big thank you to all the listening audience, all the fan base out there who've been so loyal. Talk about loyalty. I honestly believe, and I know a lot of the guys say this, but I truly believe we really have the greatest fans on the planet, as you have so faithfully, at least for me in my career, followed me and supported me, and still do to this day. I'm totally blown away by that. Continue continually humbled by that. And so I just say thank you again, Chris, Steve, and all the listening audience, all the fans, all the wrestling fans. Thank you.
This is Kevin Sullivan, and I'm joining Steve and the Scum. We're coming from the bowels of the earth. We'll be talking about everything from the glory days of wrestling to the wrestling of today to who knows what earth-shattering things we'll be talking about, because I had to reach down and pull the Scum out of the gutter, and I found Steve right next to him. So I'll be joining the show, and I'm going to change the name to the Sullivan Slaughterhouse. Tune in. It's going to be a very interesting year for everybody.
Well, there you have it, folks. Wrestling's Glory Days Weekly with Steve and the Scum, ready to come at you and present Sullivan's Slaughterhouse. And I can tell you, Steve, I'm pretty excited. Kevin Sullivan going to be calling the shots around here. I'm also pretty excited that somebody finally reached down and pulled me out of the gutter. Once a scum, always a scum, I suppose. But big things. Who knows with the history and not only as a competitor, one of the most feared and believable heels ever in the professional wrestling industry, not to mention years upon years with the book in his hand, the Booker Man, as Brian Pillman so infamously coined him. Kevin Sullivan going to be calling the shots with Steve and the Scum leading the way, so to speak. Can't wait. That will be coming at you soon. Season 3, I guess I don't even know if you would call it Season 3, kind of a whole new beginning here for Wrestling's Glory Days Weekly as we move into the Sullivan phase.
Yeah, this is really, really cool. And like you said, really unpredictable. We have no idea from what angle he's going to come from. But, he did mention in that teaser talking about, of course, the glory days of pro wrestling. That's always going to be the topic of conversation when you're dealing with a show, Wrestling's Glory Days with Steve and the Scum. We're always going to be about classic pro wrestling. But he also mentioned talking about the new product and alluded to other things. So I'm very curious as to knowing what other things are. So we'll go from there. But yeah, a huge announcement. The Sullivan Show on Twitter. We'll have a Twitter page set up very, very soon and some graphics to follow so you guys can kind of find where we're at online. I have pretty much everything ready to go, Scum. I can't even wait. It's been so long. We've been dying to tell people who this was, and finally the big announcement. Sullivan Slaughterhouse.
Be interested to see if any of you remembered Sullivan Slaughterhouse. I will tell you one thing. If you don't remember it, you'll certainly remember that name heading into the next season because there's going to be big things coming from that program. The sky's the limit there. And we can't wait. Like Steve had just alluded to, we've been waiting, sitting on our hands here, bated breath, waiting to bust out the big news since we had had contact and since Kevin had expressed the interest in hosting the program with us. And it just, everything's been coming together. We're hoping to have a debut, later on here down in the summer. As we approach, we'll certainly keep you posted. And, the guests are going to be top notch, like Steve said as well. Obviously, you're still going to get all the best in Wrestling's Glory Days with Kevin Sullivan. Who knows what else you're going to get?
That's right, man. Well, you made a good point as to the when and where all this is going to happen. We can tell you that it's going to, the premiere of the show will certainly be within, I don't know, you're listening to this show the third weekend in July. So we would probably say, Scum, within the next month, you'll definitely get some sort of content of that. Now, we wanted to let our fans in on a little something here. Guys, if you're on the East Coast, it's about the time of the year where Steve and the Scum meet up and go to a very cool wrestling event based on the Glory Days of Wrestling. And it doesn't get more Glory Days than the Mid-Atlantic NWA Fan Fest in Charlotte, North Carolina. It's July 31st through August 3rd. Plenty of things going on there. Dusty Rhodes is the feature attraction, and Scum, fill our listeners in on what's going on based with Dusty Rhodes.
Yeah, Steve, that's the NWA Legends Fan Fest, and it's the 10th anniversary, and it's the final year that they're doing it in Charlotte. It's the weekend of July 31st through August 3rd. Steve and the Scum will be there, and that's a complete afterthought with the name of these legends. If you're a fan of classic professional wrestling, of the glory days of professional wrestling like we talk about, like Steve said, Dusty Rhodes is going to be have a Q&A entitled Dusty Rhodes and All the Dreams Men, which will be featuring the new host of Sullivan Slaughterhouse, Kevin Sullivan, Magnum TA, Barry Windham, James J. Dillon, and Tully Blanchard in a Q&A roundtable type setting. In addition to that, other names that were just announced to be there this week, as they're still adding names on top of it, Ricky Steamboat, Arn Anderson, were just named this week. Ole Anderson will be there. So for you Horseman fans, that count on that, in attendance at this Legends Fest will be J.J. Dillon, Arn Anderson, Ole Anderson, Tully Blanchard, Lex Luger, and Barry Windham are all already confirmed to be at there. Another recent guest of ours that when you think NWA, you think Wrestling's Glory Days, Harley Race will be there. Ron Simmons will be there. Vader will be there. The list goes on and on of the people. I'm just looking at it now. Jim Cornette will be there with the Heavenly Bodies. Rocky Johnson, Ox Baker, Jerry Briscoe, Bob Caudle, Don and Rocky Carnoodle, Moondog Rex. Our guest from last week, Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff, Superfly Jimmy Snuka, Exotic Adrian Street, and Miss Linda. Lanny Poffo will be there as the Poffo family. The entire family will be inducted into the Hall of Heroes, which is kind of their Hall of Fame that they do each year. They have a banquet, and those are just the featured guests. There's also plenty of guests that are there as far as with the vendors as well. I know Sabu, Tommy Dreamer, Shane Douglas, Sandman, some old ECW names there. Just the list goes on and on and on of who's going to be in attendance. It's just a huge weekend, and it's the last time they're doing it. It's the final NWA Mid-Atlantic Wrestling Legends Fan Fest. That's July 31 through August 3rd in Charlotte.
Scum, I want to drop this little tidbit of information now. You just mentioned a slew of classic names, guys that we've either had on our show or would love to have on our show. And now, given the dynamic of having Kevin Sullivan, Steve and the Scum under the same roof that weekend, what are the chances that we can bring mobile Wrestling's Glory Days Sullivan Slaughterhouse Studios with us? Imagine how many great interviews we could pull out of that weekend. Scum Nation, Slaughterhouse Nation, stay tuned. Going to be a really interesting weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would think that goes without saying. A couple other ones I saw, Restoring Order there. You'll have Tommy Young and Scrappy McGowan from the classic NWA guys, the guys in the stripes. And another thing that I just noticed will absolutely be running wild at Legends Fan Fest, apparently, is Mulkey Mania.
Oh, yeah, that's great. I wonder who's going to drop one of those guys on their skulls at that thing.
Yeah, if nothing else, like maybe we can get him into a match and like score a quick win over the Mulkeys.
Oh boy, I'll tell you what, I'm sure I know one guy that probably had several wins over the Mulkeys that lasted 10 or 15 seconds maybe, and that was Nikita Koloff. He was a great guest this week, and going back to the beginning of the interview, he mentioned being on that football team with Nord the Barbarian and Mr. Perfect Kurt Hennig and Rick Rude. Imagine that. Holy crap.
Yeah, I would have liked to seen, I know they wasn't as deep of a roster, but a few years down the line when they were at more collegiate age, I would have liked to seen a bench emptying brawl between whatever high school that was out there in Minnesota and West Texas State University. you get Henning, and Nord and Rude and the Road Warriors and Nikita, and then on the other side of the coin you got Brody, Hanson, Funk, all those guys, just madmen. Manny Fernandez in there throwing a few.
Oh, boy, I can imagine Manny Fernandez locking up with Nord the Barbarian.
Yes, yeah. I tell you what, I know it would be tough to bet against either of those two.
Oh, no, that's a classic right there. That I don't know if anybody's ever seen a match of those two guys locking it up, but I would love to. I don't think I ever have. But moving on from there, you want to talk about viciousness, man. Nikita had one of the most brutal friggin' clotheslines of all time, the Russian sickle. And, last week we talked about who had the best pile driver, and I think we can all agree, and I know that Mr. Wonderful himself will certainly testify that he did. So we'll leave it at that with the best pile driver. But, it brings up a good question this week as to who had the best clothesline. Now, Nikita had a hell of a good one. There's got to be some other guys out there that come to mind, Scum.
Well, I think first and foremost, an old favorite of both of ours that we've always talked the praises of, when you think of clothesline, you think of the big lanky frame, no matter what, whether it was as an acolyte or the APA they became, or JBL, or way back when he was Justin Hawk Bradshaw. That clothesline from hell, man, I don't know that there's a more believable move that when you're just sitting there watching it like, oh my God, he just took that guy's head off, than when then Bradshaw winds up and just drops somebody with that thing.
Oh.
Easily, I would say, again, glory days, whatever era you want to talk. Personal favorite, don't get me wrong, the sickle was vicious, but Bradshaw, I gotta go with, my man.
Oh, I gotta say that he has one of the, if not the best clotheslines, and probably the most argued guy against Bradshaw's clothesline would be another guy from Borger, Texas, as we all know, the bad man from Borger, Texas, the Lariat, Stan Hansen. As a matter of fact, the man's nickname was after his move, the Lariat. So you got to say that Bradshaw and Stan Hansen, hand in hand, probably the most brutal clotheslines of all time. So Bradshaw, Stan Hansen. There were some other guys out there. Let's get a little bit deeper. And Scum Nation, if you're listening to the show, leave your input on our Twitter page at WGD Weekly. Let us know what you think. Who had the best? Actually, the hell with it. Do last week's too. If you listen to Paul Orndorff, who had the best pile driver? And of course, this week's show, Nikita Koloff, the Russian sickle, the Lariat from Stan Hansen, JBL's clothesline from hell. Who had the best clothesline of all time? Scum, there any other guys that come to mind for you?
Well, a couple that come to mind. Again, I gave kind of a variation of a theme, if I could dig into a term from my Andy Kaufman fandom, and say last week I kind of did the pile driver on the table. Some of the most vicious and memorable clotheslines to me were ones that were performed in double team form by some great tag teams. The Doomsday Device. Other teams have done it, where Animal had scooped the guy on his shoulders and Hawk had just knocked their skull off with a clothesline off the top. I think our buddy J.J. Dillon, I think that was the one in that WarGames, if I remember correctly, that, wound up with like his right collarbone, like touching like his spine.
Yeah, it was in his left pocket. His right collarbone was in his left pocket.
After that fall. Another one near and dear to myself that I always liked that maybe people don't remember as fondly from the tag team ranks as that was the Heart Attack, the Jim Neidhart bear hug, bounce off the ropes, and Brett with the sit-out clothesline for the Hart Foundation back in the mid-'80s when they had, up until about 1990, when they had their great tag team run. Another one that comes to mind, a memorable clothesline. And again, not that any of those guys didn't give a good single clothesline, the Road Warriors specifically, but it seems like you mentioned earlier with the Lariat, Hansen, for a while people actually referred to the clothesline as the Lariat. It seems like if you are a big, lanky Texan, like a Barry Windham.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
Or somebody like that, it seemed those guys always had, you know who else had a very believable clothesline when he would get running and they bop? A couple of guys that come to mind. It seemed like the guys would take that bump where they'd bounce back up off it and they'd hit the ropes with a few in succession. The Ultimate Warrior, Lex Luger come to mind as guys hitting the rope, bang, nailing them with that big clothesline. Vicious.
Yeah, a Warrior I was thinking Warrior when you were segueing into this part. I was thinking, Ultimate Warrior did have that clothesline. That one of his few moves that were great.
Much like Stan Hansen, another tandem of guys, especially one of them, not taking anything away from the daddy, as he was once like to refer to himself, but because Scott Steiner certainly had a good one, but Rick Steiner, when they would actually call it the Steiner line, used to certainly deliver a stiff, let's say, clothesline.
Oh yeah, totally. A couple of guys that I was thinking of as we got going here, Scum, from the new product, and again we're all classic wrestling here, but this guy's kind of a journeyman. He's been around for 10 plus years on the indies is Brody Lee, but Luke Harper, on Raw now, his clothesline is absolutely vicious. So I want to get that out there. He's one of the guys that I actually enjoy watching the new stuff. But another guy that you wouldn't think had a great clothesline, but everything this guy did just had an attitude of just viciousness with it, just because of his demeanor. Randy Savage had a vicious clothesline.
Absolutely. Sure. He a lot of times hit the clothesline like Brett did on that bear hug, the heart attack, where he would sit out when he hit the clothesline.
Yes. Yeah. And it always makes, you get the bigger bump in the ring. And I think that kind of, magnifies the move a little bit, but you didn't need any of that with guys like JBL and Stan Hansen. They'll take your full head right off. But like you said, lanky Texans seem to have the market cornered on good clotheslines. All right, Scum. Well, I would have to say that everybody that we just talked about with all these great clotheslines were certainly in the top 10 of pretty much anybody that follows classic pro wrestling or watched it back in the day. If we're forgetting anybody, leave it on our Facebook page or on Twitter at WGD Weekly. We're going to move on. Scum, I got to be honest with you, dude. I was laughing my ass off when I heard that we were getting pulled out of the gutter by Kevin Sullivan. It just made me more excited for Sullivan Slaughterhouse.
Yeah. Well, again, I guess looking back, it was kind of funny, but actually when a hand reached down and just grabbed me around my throat after, rummaging around in a ditch for a bit, at first I wasn't too amused by it, but, hey, surprisingly, the man has I don't know if it was that Kool-Aid he was serving or what, but I really just couldn't say no.
No, it's probably difficult to say no to Kevin Sullivan. He'll spike you with that golden spike, and you're doing whatever he tells you to do anyway. So I tried to avoid that as well. Pull me out of the gutter, if you will. Really excited for this new setup here. But next week, Scum, our season finale, it's going to be the end of our era, so to speak, of just you and I doing a show together. So I'm looking forward to that type of closure and moving on to new ventures with you, my man. But what a great way to end it with Jim Cornette and the new host, Kevin Sullivan, talking about such a variety of different things, folks. You don't want to miss it. It's really, really good stuff. And great way to close out our show.
Yeah, absolutely. Wrap up the season. Move into the new venture here with hitting the ground running. Again, we threw little hiatus that we had here with a lot of stuff going on, and as we were trying to put pieces together leading into the Sullivan Slaughterhouse venture, we came up and upon a anniversary. Our 1 year anniversary would have been about a month and a half ago. So this Jim Cornette and Kevin Sullivan was kind of handpicked by both Steve and the Scum as our celebratory kind of a fun show that we were going to have, and it certainly doesn't disappoint. It exceeds any expectations, to be honest with you. As a special note, next week we've also received confirmation that our new host, Kevin Sullivan, will not only be joining us for the interview with Jim Cornette, but he will also be joining us for a little bit of a preview, maybe a sneak peek at what you'll be getting with Sullivan Slaughterhouse coming up and heading forward, Steve.
Yeah, that's really, really cool. And if you guys missed it right after the Nikita interview, we're going to end our show this week again with the announcement from the the devil himself from the bowels of the earth, as he says. So I look forward to hearing that one more time before we roll out, Scum. Next week, a classic. It's going to be great. Those two guys are hilarious together, and there's really a couple of great moments early on in that interview where I hope I can get to play it. I got to do a little bit of editing work right there. Wink, wink, nod, nod between those two guys, but I'd like to be able to get that onto the interview so everybody could hear these two guys kind of talk to each other. You could tell it had been a while since they communicated, but boy, they fell right in line, and what a heck of an interview we have for you next week. So stay tuned for that. And we're going to play that Kevin Sullivan spot for you right here again. Scum, great week. Anything you add before we head out?
Before the clip comes back on, like, I don't know, did I slip or something? Like, where did I wind up? How am I? Is this that I'm looking at around me? Is this the bowels of the earth?
Apparently.
Well, either way, folks, we can't thank you enough for tuning in. We appreciate it. Bigger and better things coming at you. Maybe the best show that I could imagine coming at you next week from Wrestling's Glory Days Weekly. And outside of that, I don't have much left here, Steve. I think we're just about out of time. So why don't we leave everybody with the new host of Sullivan's Slaughterhouse?
This is Kevin Sullivan, and I'm joining Steve and the Scum. We're coming from the bowels of the earth. We'll be talking about everything from the glory days of wrestling to the wrestling of today to who knows what earth-shattering things we'll be talking about, because I had to reach down and pull the Scum out of it better, and I found Steve right next to him. So I'll be joining the show, and I'm going to change the name to the Sullivan Slaughterhouse. Tune in. It's going to be a very interesting year for everybody.